Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I thought it would be the happiest moment of my life. I really did. You know that feeling when you've worked so hard for something that it starts to feel like a part of you? That was this. That mortgage wasn't just a bank debt sitting on paper, it was a burden my parents had been carrying on their backs for nearly 3 decades. I'd heard them talk about it in quiet voices after dinner when they thought I wasn't listening. I'd seen the tension on my dad's face when property taxes crept up. I'd heard my mom sigh whenever a new bill came in, and she'd start calculating aloud, like she was trying to talk herself into believing everything was still manageable. So I thought, this is it. This is how I give something back to the people who raised me. I thought they'd see it for what it was, not just a financial gesture, but something bigger. A kind of love letter in the form of a clear debt. I spent years saving, quietly, methodically, while watching everyone around me spend money like they were allergic to savings accounts. I skipped vacations, I turned down weekend getaways, I drove a car so old it rattled like a tin can in a windstorm. I cut coupons, I worked extra hours, I said no to brunch and yes to night shifts. All for this moment. I stood in their kitchen with a manila envelope in my hands, the kind of envelope you'd normally use for boring things like insurance forms or tax returns. But this one was different. Inside was a single sheet of paper that represented everything I'd sacrificed. It had the bank's logo at the top and 3 words in bold near the bottom that I kept reading over and over like they were lyrics to a song. Paid. In. Full. I laid it gently on the kitchen table and waited. My mom was stirring sugar into her coffee. My dad was reading the newspaper. Yes, an actual newspaper. He still gets it delivered like it's 1989. I said, as calmly as I could, I wanted to surprise you. The house is paid off. The mortgage is gone. I swear, there was a moment, just one fleeting second, where something flickered in their eyes. Maybe shock. Maybe pride. But it disappeared so fast I wondered if I imagined it. My mom looked at the paper, tilted her head slightly, and smiled in that polite way she uses when a neighbor brings over store-bought cookies. Not cold, not warm, just surface level. My dad chuckled. Not a belly laugh, not the kind of laugh you'd expect from a man who just found out he was free of 30 years of debt. Just a casual, dry little chuckle. Then he said something I'll never forget. Something that clanged around in my ears like a dropped pan. Well, that's great. Now we can finally add your brother to the deed. Just like that. Just like that. No hug. No tears. No heartfelt thank you. No, you didn't have to do this, but it means the world. Just a plan to hand over half the ownership of the house to my brother, the same brother who never worked a day in his life without quitting halfway through. The same brother who borrowed money from them every other month and never paid a cent back. The same brother who crashed 2 cars and blamed the rain both times. That brother. Ryan. I nodded like I agreed. Like it made perfect sense. Like I wasn't already dying inside. I didn't even feel the floor under my feet anymore. It was like someone had reached inside my chest, grabbed my lungs, and squeezed. My heart didn't break in a dramatic way. It just kind of crumbled in slow motion, like dry leaves under a boot. And I didn't say a damn word. Because if I had, I might have started screaming. I sat there while they talked about logistics, which notary to use, how soon they could get the paperwork done. My mom mentioned how Ryan deserves to have security, too, as if I hadn't just handed them security on a silver platter. My dad was already pulling out his phone to text my brother the news. He'll be thrilled, he said, like Ryan had somehow earned this moment through sheer existence. That night, I lay in my old childhood bed staring at the ceiling. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up studying in that room, while Ryan was out getting drunk with his buddies and blowing through money like it was Monopoly cash. I remembered the time I bought groceries for my parents when Mom's card got declined, and Dad told me, "Don't tell Ryan, he'll feel bad." I remembered all the times I got left out, overlooked, expected to be the one who just understood. But that night, something changed. Not outwardly. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out or throw anything across the room like you see in movies. but something inside me went cold. Not angry, calculated. Not petty, patient. Something ancient and quiet and deadly calm. Have you ever done something for someone you love, only to watch them hand the credit, or worse, the benefit, to someone else? Have you ever poured everything you had into a moment, only to realize they never even noticed you were pouring at all? Because if you have, you know exactly how I felt. I smiled at them the next morning and said nothing. I told them I was happy for Ryan. I acted like the good daughter I've always been. But in my head, a different plan had already started to take shape. A plan they'd never see coming. And it started with a single word I'd been ignoring for years: ownership. It's strange how the human brain doesn't always remember things in order, but instead recalls memories in waves, stirred by emotion more than chronology, and that's exactly what started happening to me after that moment at the kitchen table. While they sat there sipping coffee and planning how to hand over half the house to Ryan, my brain began unspooling decades of quiet resentments I'd locked away, thinking they'd dissolved over time. But they hadn't. They'd just been buried beneath politeness and self-sacrifice, waiting for the right moment to claw their way back to the surface. That moment had finally arrived. I started remembering all the little things that, on their own, might not seem like much, but when stacked together formed a mountain I'd been forced to climb alone. Like how Ryan never had to ask for anything twice. He'd mention a problem, and the solution would magically appear. His car broke down during college, and my parents co-signed a loan for a new one without blinking. When I asked for help paying my tuition fees the year I got laid off, my dad said, "You're a smart girl, you'll figure it out." And I did, of course I did. I always figured it out. That was the role I'd been cast in from childhood, the dependable one, the fixer, the one who cleaned up the mess without ever making one of her own. Even when we were kids, the favoritism wasn't subtle, it was written into the fabric of our lives. Ryan was the golden boy, the source of stories my parents loved to tell at barbecues and family dinners, even when those stories were about things he'd barely earned or things he outright failed at. When he flunked a math class in high school, they blamed the teacher. When I got a perfect score on my college entrance exams, they nodded and said, "Well, you've always been a hard worker." Not brilliant. Not talented. Just hardworking, like a dependable mule trudging along with a smile. One birthday dinner really stuck in my head, and I don't know why it hadn't hit me harder back then. Ryan had just gotten back from yet another job he'd quit because his boss didn't respect his creativity, and we were all at some upscale steakhouse, the kind with cloth napkins and waiters who look like they could teach you about wine pairings. He ordered the most expensive steak on the menu. I ordered pasta, trying to keep the bill low because I knew my parents were tight on money that month. But at the end of the night, when the check came, it slid toward me like it had a homing device. My dad said, half joking, "You've got the better salary right now, honey." Ryan didn't even reach for his wallet. He just smiled like a prince waiting to be served. That night, I paid for a dinner I didn't enjoy while my brother basked in the glow of unearned indulgence, and it hit me again, that pattern never stopped. Every celebration had a cost, and somehow, I always footed the bill while Ryan collected the praise. So when my parents said they wanted to add him to the deed, it wasn't some new betrayal. It was just the latest page in a very long, very bitter book. But this page had a new twist. Because this time, I wasn't just going to swallow it. I wasn't going to be the silent fixer. I wasn't going to keep nodding while they erased me from my own story. When my dad said, "It's only fair, since you already got your reward," the joy of giving, I think something inside me broke. Or maybe it was something finally snapping back into place. Joy of giving? I wanted to laugh right in his face. But instead, I just smiled. That same tight, careful smile I'd perfected over the years. The one that made people think I was fine when I was already halfway out the door emotionally. That night, while they discussed deed transfers and congratulated themselves on being such thoughtful parents, I was already on my phone in the guest bedroom, quietly searching legal terms I'd never bothered to learn before. Words like equitable lien, property interest, constructive trust, undue enrichment. I started reading case studies, real estate blogs, and forums where people shared their own stories of being pushed out by family under the warm blanket of politeness and guilt. I wasn't planning a fight. I wasn't going to yell or plead or demand fairness. That's not how this worked anymore. I was planning something slower, sharper, something colder than confrontation and deeper than resentment. I was going to play their game, but on my terms this time. I'd been quiet for too long, and they'd mistaken my silence for submission. But I'd learned to use silence like a weapon, and they were about to find out just how sharp it could be. While Ryan celebrated his new title of co-owner, I started compiling a list of contacts: real estate lawyers, title experts, financial advisors. I wrote down everything. I kept every document. I logged every conversation. Because if they wanted to treat me like a generous bystander in my own story, I was going to rewrite the ending and make sure they never saw it coming. They'd handed the keys to my brother thinking he'd earned something. But they didn't know that behind my quiet nod, a silent knife was already being sharpened. There's a strange kind of power in saying nothing, in sitting still while the world around you shifts in all the wrong directions. People mistake silence for acceptance, and when you're a woman who's spent her life making everyone else feel comfortable, that assumption becomes your most dangerous weapon. So that's what I did. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand anything when my parents casually handed half of what I paid for to my brother like it was a birthday gift. I smiled. I said thank you when they passed me the mashed potatoes. I asked about my mother's garden, nodded at my father's jokes, and let them believe they'd smoothed everything over. I played the part they expected me to play, the same quiet daughter who gave and never asked for anything in return. But behind that polite smile, I was already working on something they didn't see coming. 2 days after they made it official and put Ryan's name on the deed, I scheduled an appointment with a real estate attorney. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I took the day off work, drove to a firm in a neighboring city, and sat in a conference room with a man named Alan Finch who wore wire-rimmed glasses and looked like the kind of person who didn't get rattled by much. I handed him the documents, the mortgage statement marked paid in full, the property deed with Ryan's freshly printed name on it, a few family photos I'd brought for context, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I just needed someone to see the whole picture. I explained everything, every quiet slight, every decision they made behind my back, every cent I scraped together to make that payment. I told him how they smiled and called it fair to give Ryan half after I paid off the debt, how my father told me I should feel joy in giving, as if I'd won some spiritual prize while they handed the material one to my brother. Alan listened without interrupting, occasionally scribbling notes or raising an eyebrow. Then he asked one question that stopped me cold. Did you sign a waiver or a gift letter? I stared at him, confused. A gift letter? I asked. He nodded. When someone pays off a mortgage for another party, it's considered a gift unless it's explicitly documented otherwise. But most banks require a gift letter to make that official. Did the bank ask you for one? No, I said slowly. They just accepted the payment. Did your parents ever sign anything stating that you waived ownership rights or relinquished claim to the property? I shook my head. Nothing like that. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with that kind of calculating stillness that only lawyers and chess players seem to master. Then he said something I didn't expect, something that felt like the first real breath of air I'd taken in days. If you wanted the house, he said, legally, you could take it. Those 7 words landed like a thunderclap inside my chest. I didn't respond right away because I wasn't sure I heard him correctly. I leaned in, asked him to explain, and he did, methodically, patiently, clearly. He told me that because there was no official record categorizing my payment as a gift and no signed waiver surrendering interest, I had a legitimate legal basis to assert a financial and equitable claim on the property. In simpler terms, my parents hadn't filed the paperwork properly. They hadn't protected themselves from what they assumed was just another generous gesture from their daughter. But I hadn't just paid a debt. I had, in legal language, increased my claimable interest in the asset, the house they now thought belonged equally to my brother. Alan gave me options. He talked about equitable liens, constructive trusts, reimbursement claims, and partition rights. It wasn't a straightforward path, he admitted, but it was solid, especially since I had documentation and clear evidence of intent. But the part that stuck with me the most was when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't need to scream or demand anything. You don't even need to tell them. You can do all of this quietly, through filings, through legal notices, through strategy. They won't even know what's happening until the structure beneath them starts to shift." I drove home that evening with my hands tight around the steering wheel and a storm brewing in my head. Not an angry storm, not wild or chaotic, but slow, deliberate, electric. I was still the same daughter they thought they knew, but something had changed now. I had leverage and, more importantly, I had clarity. They had taken me for granted for so long they never imagined I'd fight back. They thought kindness was a permanent state of being, not a choice I made daily, and they never imagined I could choose something else. They were wrong. In the following weeks, I began gathering what Alan had called foundational control. I requested every transaction document from the bank. I initiated a title review. I made notes of every financial record I had involving the mortgage payment, receipts, emails, confirmations. I started the process of filing a lien. I even contacted a second attorney to confirm everything. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role they expected, cheerful, calm, generous. I brought over homemade cookies, asked about Ryan's latest job, complimented the new plants in their front yard. But behind the curtain, I was repositioning every chess piece. They thought I'd moved on. They thought I'd accepted it. They thought I'd swallowed the betrayal and buried it, like I'd buried so many other wounds over the years. But this time, I wasn't going to carry their choices in silence. I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story while I stood quietly on the sidelines. They wanted to pretend like everything was still the same. But nothing was the same anymore. And they had no idea just how much was about to change. There's something strangely satisfying about doing things slowly and deliberately, about moving like a shadow through a world that's convinced you're still asleep. I had no interest in revenge through drama or fireworks or screaming matches in the driveway. That's not how people like my parents operate, and frankly, it's not how I do things either. If they were going to feel the weight of what they'd done, it wasn't going to come from some loud confrontation. It was going to come from silence, from a stack of paper filed properly and precisely. From the kind of action they wouldn't understand until it was too late to undo. It began with the lien. An equitable lien, to be exact, not a transfer of ownership, not a hostile takeover, but a very legal, very effective tool that positioned me exactly where I needed to be. I filed it quietly, without announcing a thing, without even changing the expression on my face when I visited their house that weekend and complimented the new curtains. What the lien did was simple. It gave me first claim on the house if it was ever sold, refinanced, or legally altered. They could live there, sure. They could call it home, absolutely. But they couldn't touch it without touching me first. They couldn't move a single financial stone without knocking into the wall I'd just built around their so-called gift to Ryan. And they didn't find out right away. That's the beauty of it, the way the system works in silence, like a current beneath the surface. I waited. I didn't rush. I knew eventually they'd try something, and they did. About 3 weeks after I filed the lien, my father started the process of refinancing. I don't know if it was to renovate or just to clear out some other debts, but the moment he submitted the paperwork, it hit a wall. The lender contacted them. The file had been flagged. The house was legally encumbered. That was the word, encumbered. Not a word you hear often in everyday conversation, but powerful enough to slam a door shut when it shows up on a property title. I got a call from my mother the same day, her voice brittle with confusion. "Did something happen with the bank?" she asked, pretending she didn't already suspect the answer. I played dumb. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said calmly. But later that evening, I sent them a letter, formal, legal, precise, and cold enough to frost the glass on their windows. It said simply this: "This property is now subject to a recorded equitable lien. Any transaction involving this asset without my written consent is void and unenforceable." I didn't even sign it with warmth. Just my full name in clean block letters. The fallout was immediate. My father called first, voice tight, trying to keep control. He asked me if I'd lost my mind. I asked him if he ever really thought about whose name should have been on that deed. My mother called an hour later, voice shaking, trying to sound like she was holding it together, but already unraveling at the seams. She said she didn't understand what I wanted. I said I wanted nothing. That was the part they never understood. I never wanted the house. I wanted the respect they never thought I needed. I wanted them to realize what they'd done, not just to me, but to themselves, how they'd treated the person who tried hardest to give them peace. And then, of course, came Ryan. Predictably loud, dramatically angry, ranting over the phone like a child who'd just been told his toys weren't really his. He called me selfish, told me I was ruining everything. I told him calmly, "You wanted to be on the deed. Now you can deal with the complications that come with ownership." That's the thing people forget. Ownership isn't just a title on paper. It's responsibility. It's risk. It's exposure. And for the first time in his life, Ryan was facing consequences for something he didn't understand. He thought being on the deed meant pride, power, status. He never imagined it meant debt, legal complexity, encumbrance. He wanted the house. Now he could have the headache too. They tried to reason with me after that. My mother called again, this time crying. She said the house was their sanctuary, that they didn't mean to hurt me, that they just thought it would be nice to include Ryan, that it didn't mean they loved me any less. I listened without interrupting. I let her talk, let her try to stitch together the bleeding edges of a story she'd already torn apart. Then my father got on the phone and did what I never thought I'd hear from him. He asked me to undo it. Just like that. No explanation, no accountability. Just a request to make the problem go away like I always did, like the responsible daughter they'd relied on for so many years. I paused. I let the silence hang heavy between us, let them feel what it's like to wait for an answer they can't control. And then, with the calmest voice I've ever used in my life, I said, "I'll think about it." Not yes, not no. Just enough ambiguity to remind them that the power had shifted, that the person they thought would always roll over was now holding the pen that rewrote every rule they ever assumed was permanent. They thought I was the good daughter. They never imagined I'd be the one holding the blade, quiet, sharp, and perfectly legal. It didn't take long for the cracks to start showing, and once they did, it was like watching a house built on sand slowly and helplessly sink under its own weight. At first, they tried to pretend nothing had changed, acting like the lien I placed was just a temporary inconvenience, a minor hiccup in the smooth surface of their carefully curated lives. My father still mowed the lawn every Saturday with military precision, and my mother still arranged her flower beds like she was competing for some imaginary suburban gardening award. But underneath it all, the pressure was building, quiet, suffocating, undeniable, and no matter how hard they tried to keep things normal, the walls were closing in around them. It started with Ryan, of course. He'd always been the first to crack under pressure because he was never built to carry anything heavier than his own ego. He figured being on the deed made him some kind of mini-landlord, some self-proclaimed property investor who could finally turn his life around without lifting a finger. He strutted around like the house had become his inheritance in advance, like he'd finally proven himself just by existing in the right place at the right time. But reality hit him harder than he expected, and it came not in the form of a scolding or a confrontation. It came in the form of a bank rejection letter. He tried to take out a second mortgage, probably hoping to finally get the cash cushion he'd been begging for his whole adult life. Maybe he wanted to buy a car, maybe he had plans to start some ridiculous business, or maybe he just wanted money to burn through like he always had. Whatever his plan was, it evaporated the moment the bank reviewed the property title and saw my lien sitting there like a locked gate. His application was denied without ceremony. No negotiation, no middle ground, no loophole to slip through. Just a hard no, stamped and sealed. He raged, naturally. He called the bank, yelled at some poor loan officer, tried to talk his way around the system like charm alone could rewrite legal records. It didn't work. It never does. When that failed, he tried something even more foolish. He tried to sell his share of the property. He reached out to people he knew, even listed it discreetly online, thinking someone might be interested in owning part of a house still occupied by his parents and legally entangled with a claim he couldn't untangle. But no one wanted it. Of course they didn't. Who in their right mind would want to buy half of a family house already tied up in legal restraints and emotional baggage? Every potential buyer backed out as soon as they realized they'd be stepping into a mess with no exit door. That was when the panic really set in. My parents, still clinging to their fantasy of control, tried to refinance again, still hoping to secure some money against the house. Again, the lien blocked them. Again, they were denied. They realized, slowly and then all at once, that they were trapped inside a home they thought they owned, but could no longer manipulate, reshape, or leverage. Financially, they were cornered. Legally, they were boxed in. Emotionally, they were starting to unravel. The next family dinner was a disaster before the roast even hit the table. The tension was so thick it might as well have been smoke filling the room. My mother tried to pretend everything was fine, smiling too hard and pouring too much wine. My father was quieter than usual, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward Ryan every few minutes like they were silently coordinating an ambush. Ryan, meanwhile, couldn't stop bouncing his leg under the table, nerves turning into agitation. I sat there calmly, eating my meal, watching the performance unfold like a play I'd already read the script for. Eventually, the facade broke. My father put down his fork, looked directly at me, and said the words I'd been expecting all evening. "You're punishing us," he said, voice low and flat, not accusatory but defeated, like he couldn't decide whether to be angry or ashamed. I looked at him, held his gaze without blinking, and replied in the most even tone I could manage, "No. I'm just letting you live with the choices you made." That sentence hung in the air like a swinging axe, and no one said a word for a full 10 seconds. My mother looked like she wanted to cry again, but this time the tears didn't come. Ryan stood up, threw his napkin down on the table, and said he was going to sue me. Said he had talked to a lawyer who told him there had to be a way around all this, that I couldn't just control the house forever. I smiled. Not because I was amused, but because I knew something he didn't. I'd already reviewed every loophole, consulted multiple attorneys, and my paperwork was bulletproof. Ironclad. Every signature, every filing, every timestamp was perfect. There was no back door, no escape hatch, no magic button that would undo what I'd done. I'd done it clean, and I'd done it right. I stood up after that, thanked my mother for dinner, and excused myself. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say anything dramatic or cruel. But just before I walked out, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, smiling faintly, but with eyes that didn't match. Because no matter how calm I was on the outside, the truth was still buried somewhere deeper, and it hurt in places I didn't know I could still feel. They thought I wanted revenge. But really, all I ever wanted was recognition. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all, not the punishment, not the power shift, but the realization that even now, with everything unraveling, they still didn't understand why it had all started in the first place. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in after the storm, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful or healing, but hollow and echoing, the kind that carries the weight of everything unsaid, everything done, everything broken that no one bothered to fix. That silence hung between us the day my parents called me in for one last conversation, one final sit-down to try and sweep the shards of our fractured family under some rug that never really existed in the first place. They invited me to the house, though they didn't call it home anymore, and I knew the moment I stepped through the front door that this wasn't about healing. It was about control, and it always had been. My father sat at the dining room table, hands clasped tightly like he was bracing for a verdict, while my mother hovered nearby with her eyes darting from him to me and back again, as if she could still moderate whatever explosion she thought might happen. But there was no explosion coming, not from me, not anymore. I'd already detonated the only bomb I needed when I filed that lien, and now all that remained was the dust they were trying so desperately to sweep into denial. They got right to the point, which I appreciated in theory, though the offer itself was just another insult dressed up as compromise. My father said, in the calmest tone he could muster, that they'd spoken to a legal advisor and were prepared to remove my name from the property documentation if I'd agree to write off the lien completely, no reimbursement, no repayment, no acknowledgement of what I'd contributed. Just a clean erasure of everything I'd done, as if it had never happened, as if that final mortgage payment had floated out of nowhere like some invisible blessing that didn't come from my bank account or my sacrifice or my blood-worn exhaustion. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at them for a moment, really looked, in a way I hadn't since this whole thing began. My mother had aged in these few months, her face drawn, her eyes rimmed with tiredness that no concealer could cover. My father looked smaller somehow, his confidence chipped and dulled, his authority reduced to polite requests instead of dismissive commands. And yet, even in that moment, even after all of it, they still didn't understand. They still thought this was about the lien. They still thought it was about money or property or paperwork. But it had never been about the house, not really. I told them that. I told them the house could rot for all I cared, but the principal would always belong to me. The lesson, the boundary, the debt they thought they could ignore, that would remain, whether it was filed at the county clerk's office or not. I didn't need walls or a roof to prove what I gave. I had already carried more weight than either of them ever admitted, and I wasn't about to let them strip the final ounce of meaning from what I did. My gift was real. Their betrayal was louder. I moved out of state not long after that conversation, sold most of my things, and bought a modest little place in a city where no one knew my last name and no one ever asked about family dinners or shared property. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, every inch of it, every square foot I earned without compromise or interference. I painted the walls with colors I liked, chose furniture that suited no one's taste but mine, and for the first time in my adult life, I slept in a home that didn't echo with guilt or favoritism or some unspoken hierarchy I never agreed to participate in. Ryan's credit crashed not long after I left. I heard about it through a distant cousin who still follows him on social media, the kind of person who shares updates about everyone else's life but never notices the bitterness beneath the smile and family photos. My parents eventually sold the house, though not before they had to restructure their finances and cut their lifestyle down to something more manageable. They moved into a smaller place, further from the city, quieter, less impressive. I didn't go to the housewarming. I didn't send a card. I didn't call. And I never went back. There's a framed document in my new home, hanging in a hallway that most visitors overlook. It's not there for show. No one really asks about it, and I don't offer an explanation. But it's there, the original copy of the lien I filed, signed, stamped, and sealed. Not out of spite, not out of pride, but as a reminder of the moment I finally drew a line, the moment I stopped pretending I was invisible just because it made other people more comfortable. They say revenge is bitter, that it eats away at the soul and leaves nothing behind but ashes. But honestly, mine tasted like quiet freedom. Not loud, not grand, not vindictive, just clean and final and quietly, beautifully mine. Was I cruel? Maybe. Was it overkill? Some might think so. But some debts deserve to be paid in full, especially the ones no one else ever acknowledged existed in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, the person I became in the process wasn't someone I hated at all. Or maybe I simply became the person they forced me to be.